So the US Army is facing this huge, growing challenge. How do you protect the country right here at home and also stay ready to fight wars abroad? Well, a new white paper is floating a pretty radical solution, and it doesn't involve more soldiers. It involves more civilians. It's a really fascinating idea, so let's break down how it would actually work and, why it's even being proposed in the first place.
And this whole idea really stems from a major shift in military thinking. It's all laid out in the 2026 National Defense Strategy, or NDS. You can think of this document as the Pentagon's roadmap, and right now it's pointing in a brand new direction that creates some serious challenges, but also some new opportunities.
All right, first up, let's look at this new defense landscape. This new strategy is basically forcing the military to juggle the immense job of protecting the homeland while, at the same time, being ready to project power anywhere on the globe.
What's so striking here is how clear the new mission is. For the very first time, the NDS officially makes defending the U.S. homeland the Department of Defense's #1, absolute highest priority. Everything else comes second. This is a monumental shift from how things used to be.
The strategy points to a core challenge that's driving this whole change. They call it the simultaneity problem. See, in the past, the military could often focus on one big threat at a time. Not anymore. Now it has to be prepared to handle multiple, serious crises in different parts of the world all at once. And that, as you can imagine, is a massive strategic strain.
So, this brings us to the military's central dilemma, this fundamental conflict between the home front and the front line. How exactly does this new top priority of homeland defense start to clash with the Army's traditional mission?
Well, here's what it looks like in the real world. When there's a hurricane, a flood, or some other major domestic emergency, who gets called in? Increasingly, it's highly trained combat soldiers. They end up managing shelters, handing out supplies, and providing logistics. Now, these are vital tasks, for sure, but they're not what these soldiers are trained for.
And this is what the white paper calls the readiness dilemma. It's just a simple zero-sum game. Every single hour a combat unit spends on a domestic support mission is a precious hour they are not spending on the incredibly complex training they need to be ready for a war. So, here's the crucial point. Fulfilling one priority directly undermines the other.
And that is the key question, isn't it? It's at the heart of this entire proposal. How can the Army possibly meet its #1 obligation to defend the homeland without totally sacrificing its readiness to deter and defeat our adversaries overseas?
Okay, this is where the new solution comes into play. The white paper puts forward a pretty bold concept: the creation of a United States Army Auxiliary.
So what is this U.S. Army Auxiliary, or USAIU, supposed to be? Well, according to the proposal, it would be a group of civilian volunteers aligned at the federal level with a very specific and very limited job: to handle non-combat support missions. We're talking logistics and emergency management, not frontline combat.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Hang on, don't we already have the National Guard for this? And that is a great question, because the distinction here is absolutely crucial. The proposed auxiliary would be a federal organization of civilians with zero combat or law enforcement powers. The National Guard, on the other hand, is a military component controlled by the states, and they have both combat and law enforcement roles. So the auxiliary would support the Army while the Guard augments it. Big difference.
And hey, this isn't some idea created out of thin air. It's actually modeled on some highly successful programs that have been around for decades. The Air Force has its Civil Air Patrol, and the Coast Guard has its auxiliary. Both use trained civilian volunteers to do critical support missions. And this proposal basically says, hey, why can't the Army do the same thing?
All right, so let's talk about the benefits. How could a corps of organized volunteers actually act as a force multiplier and make the entire military stronger and more resilient?
The logic is actually pretty straightforward. Step 1, you have trained civilian volunteers in the auxiliary take the lead on those domestic support missions. Step 2, this frees up our active duty combat units to focus entirely on their main job, training for war. And the result? Military readiness is protected, which in turn strengthens our ability to deter potential enemies. The auxiliary basically acts as a readiness buffer. So just imagine a major crisis hits. Instead of pulling soldiers away from their duties, the Army could call on this pre-trained, pre-vetted surge workforce from the auxiliary. These volunteers would already know their way around Army bases and procedures, and they'd be ready to step in and help immediately. So what kind of jobs are we actually talking about here? Well, really crucial stuff, like helping in emergency operations centers,
managing shelters, staging logistics, supporting military families during a crisis, and even helping with communications. And one really fascinating potential role is counter-drone observation, basically being extra eyes and ears to report threats, which is a critical task in modern security.
Let's zoom out for a second. This proposal for an Army auxiliary isn't just about shuffling people around. It really represents a much bigger, broader strategic shift in how we think about national defense.
The National Defense Strategy itself makes this exact point. It argues that defending the country is a whole-of-nation effort. It's a responsibility that falls on everyone, not just the people in uniform. And the Army Auxiliary would be a tangible way to put that principle right into practice.
There's a quote from the source paper that I think just captures the whole philosophy perfectly. It says, "National defense is strengthened when civilians are organized contributors rather than passive recipients of protection." The idea is to move away from a model where citizens just passively receive protection to one where they become organized, active contributors to their own security.
So all of this leads us to a final, pretty provocative question. As the demands on the U.S. military just keep growing and getting more complex, could a dedicated force of trained civilian volunteers be the innovative solution we need to protect the homeland while still staying ready for the fights of the future?